Good morning and welcome everyone to Highlander's second Southern Beyond Survival workshop on community organizing. Before we jump in, we will get everyone set up with interpretation. So I'll hand it to Rocio, who will walk you through how to get your interpretation up.
Gracias, hola y bienvenidos a todos al segundo taller de Sureñix más allá de la supervivencia. Y ahora vamos a hablar acerca de cómo tener nuestra interpretación puesta para aquellas que le necesiten. Welcome to this call. This is a bilingual space brought to you by the Sensontl Language Justice Cooperative based in Asheville, North Carolina. Bienvenidos a todos a esta llamada. Este espacio es un espacio bilingüe traído por ustedes por la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Sensontl basado en Asheville, Carolina del Norte. My name is Rocio and I'm here with my co-interpreter Carolina. Mi nombre es Rocio y estoy aquí con mi co-intérprete Carolina. Como sabemos, nuestros movimientos son multilingües y se requiere un compromiso de todos el crear espacios multilingües. As we know, our movements are multilingual and it takes everyone's commitment to create multilingual spaces. Les pedimos por favor que respiren después de cada frase, pausen al hacer preguntas o cuando cambia la persona que está participando. We ask you to please take a breath after each sentence, pause after asking a question, or when there is a switch in speakers. También recuerden que hay un solo micrófono, solamente podemos interpretar por una persona a la vez. Please be mindful there is only one mic and we can only interpret for one person at a time. También es de mucha ayuda silenciar el micrófono, así que mantengan su micrófono apagado cuando no estén participando. It's also a lot of help to mute your mic. Keep your mic muted whenever you are not participating. También, por favor, hablen en voz alta, fuerte y claro para escuchar su mensaje. Please speak up loud and clear so we can hear your message. También es de mucha importancia hablar despacio a un ritmo más lento y moderado, especialmente si leemos algo. Tendemos a ir más rápido cuando leemos. It's also very helpful to please slow down and speak at a moderate pace. It's especially helpful whenever you're reading. We tend to speed up when we read. Si después de hablar de la interpretación están teniendo problemas, déjenos saber inmediatamente, escriban un mensaje en el chat, ya sea a una de las personas que están facilitando este taller o a una de las intérpretes. If after we've gone through the instructions on how to turn on your interpretation equipment, you're still having issues, please let us know immediately. Write a message in the chat to one of the facilitators or to one of the interpreters. Entonces hablaremos de cómo acceder a la interpretación. Se va a ver de diferentes maneras. Si están por computadora, se verá como la izquierda. Si están por teléfono inteligente o tableta, se verá como la derecha. Si están por computadora, ya ha sido activada la interpretación, así que pueden ir al inferior de su pantalla. En la barra del menú verán un globo que dice interpretación. Una vez que den clic ahí, tendrán tres opciones. Modo apagado para la gente bilingüe en ambos inglés y español. El canal de inglés para la gente que solo quiere escuchar y participar en inglés en esta llamada, o el canal de español para la gente que solo quiere escuchar y participar en español en la llamada. Una vez que escojan su idioma, ya tendrán la interpretación puesta. Si están por teléfono inteligente se verá bastante similar, pero tienen que ir a la parte inferior de la esquina derecha de su pantalla. Verán tres puntos que dicen más. Ahí tendrán la misma opción de interpretación de idiomas y las mismas tres opciones. Audio original para la gente bilingüe, inglés o español. Una vez que hayan escogido el idioma en que se sienten más cómodos, pueden poner finalizado y tendrán la interpretación puesta. So to access interpretation, it may look like two ways. Depending if you're on a computer, it will look like the left-hand side. If you're on a smartphone or tablet, it will look like the right-hand side. If you're on a computer, the interpretation has been enabled, so you can go to the bottom of the screen. You'll see at the menu bar, a little globe that says interpretation. Once you click there, you'll have three options: off for bilinguals who are both bilingual in English and Spanish, the English channel for those who would like to listen and participate in English for this call, or the Spanish channel for those who would like to listen and participate in Spanish. Once you choose your language, you will have the interpretation enabled. If you're on a smartphone, it looks very similarly, but you have to go to the bottom right-hand corner Once you see the little three dots that says more, you click there and you'll have language interpretation. Once you click there, you'll have the same three options: original audio for bilinguals, English or Spanish. Once you choose the language you're most comfortable in, you put done and you will have the interpretation enabled. Muchísimas gracias, Highlander, por siempre hacer un espacio inclusivo, un espacio multilingüe. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much to Highlander for always making a multilingual space and inclusive space.
Thank you so much, Rocio, for that helpful introduction and instructions, and to Salt Lake for always holding us down with our interpretation needs. I want to hand it off to Amini on our tech team to make sure everyone knows how to use Zoom throughout this session.
Hi, everyone. We're going to share our screen so you can just see this text slide briefly, so you can see how we're going to be using our Zoom. So as you can see in this slide, that we just want you to make sure that you have access to your reactions, make sure that you can mute and unmute yourself, start your video, and also have access to participants to rename yourself with your pronouns, and also chat at any time that you need to. We're so excited that you're here. I'm Amini. I'm also here with Kat, our other tech support, and thank you for being with us.
All right, thank you, tech team. So I'll introduce myself now. I'm Ashby Haywood Kambahi. I serve on the library and archives team here at Highlander, but today I'm here as your chat monitor, in general, here to support whatever needs y'all have. So throughout this session, if anything comes up, and we'll talk a little bit more about our roles, but feel free to give me a chat if you're coming into any issues. And of course, you can reach out to Rocio for our tech team, or excuse me, our interpretation and our tech team. So to get us started, my name is Ashby, as I mentioned before. For those who can't see me, I am a brown skinned Black person with about shoulder length curly hair, and I am wearing a brown shirt, kind of monotone today. Today I am on Yuchi land in Yuchi and Cherokee land, otherwise known as Knoxville, Tennessee. And today, she, her, and or he, him pronouns work just fine for me. To get us started, we want everyone to introduce yourselves in the chat. Please tell us your name. And we want to honor our land and the original inhabitants on the land we're on. So let us know where you're at currently. And you can use the land acknowledgement link that was just shared in the chat in case you don't know where your ancestral land is. And we also want everyone to share a dish or a type of food that would guarantee turnout at an event or a meeting in your community. One dish that you know everyone will come out to or come out for. So please share that in the chat, and we'll quickly get started, and I'll hand things off to, I believe, I'm handing it off to David.
Yeah, hey y'all. So my name is David Ferris. I actually prefer just name only instead of pronouns today, and I'm on the economics and governance team here at the Highlander Center. For those who can't see me, I'm a light-skinned European heritage white person with curly hair. I have like a shaved head on one side and really long and curly on the other, wearing like an oatmeal colored sweatshirt today. And I've got a picture of Septima Clark in the background hanging out with us today. And some of the organizing that I've gotten to be a part of includes some youth empowerment and food justice work in New Orleans. I trained and supported street teams and civic association leaders in Philly as part of like community development work, neighborhood-based work in Philly. And now I'm a popular educator with the Highlander Center, and my work includes developing and sharing curriculum, leading workshops like this one, accompanying grassroots groups and grassroots leaders, and training trainers. So really excited to be here with y'all to talk about your experience with community organizing and sort of meld all of our experience and knowledge and see where we can get together at the end of this call. So I just want to share a little bit about, while we're getting those introductions in the chat, if you could go to the next slide, Catherine. I want to share a little bit about economics and governance program at Highlander. So this is Highlander. Hopefully, if you haven't been, you will get a chance to come soon. We are planning on reopening. This is our 90th year. Next slide. And the economics and governance program is focusing on strengthening solidarity economy in the South. And we see that as, post-capitalist alternatives and grassroots governing power. And we think that community organizing is really a key building block, right, for being able to strengthen solidarity economy efforts here. Next slide. So this workshop series that we're in, this is the second in the series. And we see this as sort of like the basic building blocks that we're going to need in order to build a solidarity economy and community governance across the South. And really strengthen a Freedom Southern movement for the 21st century. So we're going to drop a link in the chat where it's a permanent link on the Highlander website where we're going to keep all of the new registration for all these upcoming workshops live and active. And we're also going to post like the resources and the recordings on that site. I'm going to kick it to Ayana to just quickly introduce our agreements for the time that we spend together. Thanks so much for all these amazing dishes in the chat. I'm seeing like some really incredible food that's getting me hungry and excited for lunch after this too. So kicking it to you, Ayana.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And I am also getting hungry. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and a part of this workshop with you. For those who can't see me, like I said, my name is Ayana Clemens. I am currently wearing a black shirt with white logos. I am a Black person with black to brown locks about shoulder length. And I am on Muskogee, Yuchi, and Cherokee Native land. I also use she, her pronouns. And like David mentioned, I'm also a community organizer with Concerned Citizens for Justice and also a staffing organizing member of the Southern Movement Assembly. And so I've also participated in various types of community organizing, anything from anti-state violence campaigns all the way to organizing free food drives in light of mutual aid efforts. And so like David mentioned, before we begin, we just want to uplift our agreements as we hold space together in both as a whole group and in our small groups. So we want to make sure that we're centering Southern and marginalized voices and experiences. We want to participate fully as if our liberation is at stake. So we encourage you to make sure you're taking up space and also acknowledging when you're taking up too much space. We also want to recognize that everyone is a teacher and a learner, and we all have something to contribute. Self-care is community care. So when we're showing up as our best selves and able to step away when we need to, then together as a community, we can show up and care for each other. We also want you to go with the flow and just expect non-closure. We know there are going to be some things that folks are just now getting entered into or terms that you may not know, but just know to go with the flow and we'll catch you up to speed. We will have breaks during the workshop. So at any point in time outside of those break times, if you need to take care of yourself, we encourage you to step away and do so. We also want you to relax and engage in this workshop. We agree as trainers and facilitators, as well as our tech, to share out the slides and materials that we're going to be using today. So don't feel like you have to take a lot of notes to keep up. And just a few agreements for while we're in our small group breakouts. We ask that you remember to pause when you come off mute. We also ask that you clearly state your name, your pronouns, and also describe yourself when you're speaking for the first time. We also want to make sure that we're using a loving speech and being mindful of the ways that we share space with one another. We also want to practice one mic, and that simply means that to speak one at a time, and that way we're balancing good listening skills as well as sharing openly. We also want to consider and be cautious of the need to equalize our power relationships amongst each other. At any point in time, if you have any challenges while you're in your small breakout groups, feel free to leave the room. Lastly, we just want to emphasize and mention that anytime if there is a dynamic that you're experiencing, please go ahead and send a message to Ashby, and you can find the name by chat-Ashby. And then that way she'll let us know what to do from there. So thank y'all so much. Before we dig deep into our conversations today, we're just going to take a moment to ground in the space and do a couple of guided visualizations. So I want to encourage you all to please go ahead, if you're comfortable, to turn your cameras off. Make sure that you're on mute, and also go ahead and have your feet grounded, whether you're sitting or standing. We want to make sure we are putting our feet solid on the ground. And just when you're ready, gently close your eyes and take a deep breath. I want to encourage you all to just take a journey with me and stretch your imagination. I want you to take another deep breath. And this time I want you to imagine that you're in the setting of a loved one's home. Maybe that loved one is a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a cousin, a neighbor, or a sibling. Imagine that you're with that person in the kitchen, right? Maybe on this next breath in, you're bringing in and smelling all the favorite dishes that are beginning to be prepared. Let it fall over you like a blanket. Try to listen for the clanking and the movement of that loved one, dancing from corner to corner, going from pot to pot. Is there music playing in the background? Can you hear the water begin to boil? Take another deep breath. And now imagine that person just invited you to help. They want you to help prepare a meal for our community. Think about the recipe that you've been given to follow. Think about what dish you're going to create in order to nourish our folks. Take another deep breath in. This time, notice the ingredients that are laid out. Examine all the measurements. As you begin to taste test your dish, as you're preparing it with that loved one, I want you to consider all the different palates, all the family members, friends, and community that are being invited to enjoy that meal that you're preparing. On this last deep breath, I want you to hold on and imagine the experience that you're going to share once it's done. I want you to think about, how do you want folks to receive this culinary experience? Take one more deep breath for yourself and hold on to that visualization. And when you're ready, we ask that you gently come back. Come back into the space. If you choose to leave your cameras off or come back on. And so we're going to hold on to that guided visualization throughout today's workshop. As we mentioned earlier, today's focus is about community organizing. And just a reminder that community organizing is when people directly impacted by an issue or a problem get into formations, build organizations, and take on a collective action in order to make changes in our people's lives, whether that be in your life or someone else. We also know that community organizing is about power. In our last workshop, we used Huey Newton's definition of power, which says, community organizing is getting people together to build power to make changes that we want to see. And for us, it's also about collectively moving toward collective liberation. Why do we organize? We organize to make tangible, material changes in people's lives. We also organize to nurture the kind of community that we want to live in, to demonstrate our power, to challenge the systems and institutions that cause us harm, but to also hold these leaders accountable and get our needs and demands met. We also want to organize to change policies and practices of government and institutions in order to be more in line with our values and our visions. And lastly, we want to create our own solutions to the problems we face. We want to make sure that we're building alternatives to the domination economy and to also politics. We want to build alternatives to all of those. Alternatives such as solidarity economies and community governance. And so we just want to hold on to that as a quick reminder of what community organizing is. And so also as a reminder for today's workshop, we are going to be utilizing and structuring our conversation by the popular education organizing spiral. And that was mentioned at the beginning of our workshop last month. So just a reminder, we will be practicing step 1, which is to start with the experience of participants. So thank you all for joining us today. And we'll also be looking for patterns and then finding new information as step 3. Thank you. So for the beginning of this group discussion, we just want to recognize that the political and social terrain has shifted dramatically in the last decade, but especially in the last 6 years. And we know as community organizing on the front lines of struggle, we have experienced many changes and many shifts that have altered how we organize. Currently, we recognize that we are navigating a shifting landscape, and we know that that affects the way we build and also how we move forward together. So to start our conversation today, we just want to take a moment to hear from a couple of folks and also encourage you to drop in the chat. But we want to answer this big question. What changes have impacted our communities in organizing? And I'll say it again. What shifts and big changes have impacted our organizing in our communities? And so I see folks dropping in the chat. And yes, we can ask that in another way. What things have been either a roadblock or something that you've had to navigate that has affected the way that we share community with one another or how we interact in organizing spaces? Whether that be, I see folks putting technology. We've had to come into the Zoom world. The pandemic, definitely. Virtual programming. We also see anti-protest bills. Want to see if maybe we can have 1 or 2 folks just come off mute if something's itching at you to name.
I saw increased cost of housing in the chat.
Awesome. Mental health is a good one, as also affecting. Yes, especially in the last 6 years. We know Trump, that was 2016, y'all. Losing loved ones. So thank y'all so much. Continue to populate that in the chat. You see police violence, neoliberal economy. These are really good. These are big shifts that have impacted. And so now as y'all are go ahead and populating that in the chat, we just want to go ahead and set us up for just some small group conversations that will allow us to dig deeper into these big shifts. So we're going to just break out into small groups. It's going to be about a 15-minute discussion. And so from this question, we want to focus on 2 other questions that are going to allow us to dig deeper. That first question is, how have these larger changes and shifts affected how we organize in our communities, continuing to name those exacerbated roadblocks that we're facing? And then that second question is, amidst these big changes, what do we come back to? We want y'all to name any highlights on what remains true to you and what principles and values center you in your organizing work when these shifts are happening. And so I'll repeat them again. The first question is, what roadblocks or reoccurring roadblocks and shifts have changed the way that we organize? And then the second question, what do we come back to? And what principles and values center us and ground us in this work? And so just remember that these 15 minutes will go quickly. So we want to encourage you to try not to spend more than 1 minute per person. We also ask that you identify a note taker so that they can capture any reoccurring themes from your conversation. What we're going to do is drop in the chat some links for slides so that you can capture those notes. We do ask that you make sure that you go ahead and click on those slide links so that you have access to them before we break out. At any point in time, if you need some quiet time or a moment to yourself and you don't want to join a small breakout room, feel free to just stay in the main room. Also, if you need to leave your breakout room, feel free to click leave room and then come back to the main room. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions.
That was great. Sorry, y'all, for the mix up on the links. So the last links that I just dropped, those are the links that you'll need because we have enough people that we're going to have 24 groups.
Exciting. Thank you, David. All right, any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready. Welcome back, y'all. Welcome, welcome. I hope that y'all had some great conversations in your small group.
Diana, so sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, love.
No, you're fine.
Just reminding everyone to rejoin interpretation once you come back from your small groups. So go ahead and click on interpretation and choose your language. All right, back to you, Ayana.
Awesome, thanks, David, so much for that. Thank you. So welcome back, y'all. We hope that you had a great conversation in your small group breakouts. So now we just want to take a few minutes, about 10 minutes, to do a share back on those 2 questions. So really encourage folks to come off mute and just to share a little bit. First, we're going to share just a couple of roadblocks. Are there any that you talked about in your small groups that weren't mentioned earlier? So any other roadblocks worth naming? So I just want to invite 1 or 2 folks to come off mute.
One thought was, in our group, someone wanted to just listen for the whole session, that the participation was listening. That was their participation, although it changed, and she did participate.
So thank you, Peter.
One of the things that we found that was both a roadblock and also a antagonist was technology. And there are in that sort of bifurcates into access to technology or the ability to use it or having a signal, all of those kinds of things. And then there's the personal side of technology, which in some ways has depersonalized the way that we communicate and work together, particularly as activists, because as one of our participants said, technology we've learned the power of it. We haven't necessarily learned how to leverage it. So we're still in growing stages with that, even within the communities.
Thank you, Jane, so much. And that is so real, y'all. Technology has shifted how we organize and commune with each other. And so now I just want to pivot us to the second question and also encourage folks, feel free to put that in the chat too, if there's something that you wanted to share. But the second question, amidst these changes and roadblocks that we've named, what principles and values did y'all mention that you come back to that grounds and centers you in organizing work? And whoever feels moved to, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, we talked about, Izzy came in last, but I liked what she said about everybody's going through a lot and nobody really wants to share or talk. And my thing has always been that sometimes it's how you show up in that space to talk or to listen. You have to listen to a person and not with the immediate intent of solving an issue or whatever, to gain that trust and that their perspective where they believe that you're really, gonna fight for them, advocate for them, but it requires building some type of trust and respect. And if you're really, most of us don't listen. We just really listen with the intent to try to solve a problem, yet you don't get all the information that's needed to really solve the problem. And people pick up on that. And if you're just looking for a quick fix to jump on it like you know everything, that doesn't always build the best rapport or trust with people, especially in community organizing. But not only in community and union organizing, even in political organizing, you have to build a trust and a rapport and show that you're interested and that you have compassion and have the patience to listen to everything they have to say, because part of it is them being allowed to express how they feel.
Thank you, Tara, so much. That is so important. Respect and listening. We got to be able to listen, especially keeping our ears to the ground. It's the only way we're going to know, right? What other principles and values center you when these shifts are happening? Any other folks come off mute? Sean, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me, Ayana. I'm Sean. I'm a middle-aged Black man with curly hair and a black shirt. And it's easy to be disappointed by the lack of progress on as far as systemic change in our laws and policies that govern so much of what we do. But one of my colleagues in the breakout room mentioned the lasting generational impacts of our movements, of us being physically present in these movements on the children that are watching, on the next generation. Whereas in my youth, I don't recall large protest movements in the places that I lived. I think in most cities and even in a lot of rural spaces, these children will be able to go back to a time when their communities stood together and stood up, and that's going to stick with them. Allow them to tap back into something that they can take forward. So I thought that was a great point by one of my colleagues in the small group.
Thank you, Sean, so much for sharing. Yes, centering youth voices is such an important principle that keeps the movement going, right? Sharing, cross-generational learning, Thank you so much for uplifting that. Michael?
Yeah, I'm Michael Tierney from Big Ugly Creek in West Virginia. I'm a 60-something white guy with a long gray ponytail that has been growing out since the beginning of COVID. And a couple of things. Huge obstacle is just the sheer amount of grief and loss between the opioid epidemic and COVID. So it just feels like we're going to memorials or wishing we could go if it wasn't going to expose us to too many germs, if we have loved ones with immune system issues. But a common theme in our small group was relationships, which to me goes back to there just is that cuts through the xenophobia and the horrible political rhetoric that we have, particularly in West Virginia. But there is a tradition of hospitality and people looking out for each other, and that transcends all of that. And that I think both epidemics have really brought people out to figure out how to care for each other in the midst of these losses.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, just as simple as caring for one another, right? And in the losses, we've had to really prioritize that. And Scott, I can call on you. Let's see Scott hand raised.
Hi, I'm Scott Fortney. I'm a white middle-aged man, straight brown hair. I was really felt very privileged to be part of my group. We talked a lot about kind of dovetailing on some of these other concepts. Someone brought up in our group how, thinking smaller and more people-centric rather than policy-centric areas that we can cause cultures and culture shifts rather than looking at policy and our larger systems, to help drive change is really relevant. And JT, this is his quote, not mine. I thought it was a wonderful quote, and I hope you don't, JT, you don't mind me sharing this, but decisions are made by people who show up. And so I thought that was a really wonderful, wonderful quote, and maybe very relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, showing up and being present, right? Being willing to be transformed in the service of movement work, right? Thank you, Scott, so much. We'll hear from one last person, Chiquita, incorrect. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Correct me.
It's okay. It's Chiquita, like the banana.
Thank you.
So in our group, we talked some about what movements were working well. And so looking at the unionization of media groups and media organizations, looking at disability justice, and how far that movement has come, looking at the transformative justice and mutual aid movements, particularly in local areas like Oakland, Chicago, New York City, and also looking at the level of political organizing that's been happening through Black Voters Matter and many other local groups that have not only allowed us to flip certain states from red to blue, but also to take up more political space and power at the local level, and how that can scale up to the federal level. So it was important to identify like what actually is working. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kita. And that is so important to make sure that we're rooting in the history and legacy of our movements and drawing inspiration from those that have walked this road that we have, right? And learning from them. And so that very nicely transitions us into this next session. And I'm going to pass it over to you, David, to tell a little bit about some of the principles that we've been able to experience in our movement work and to connect the dots here.
Thanks so much, Ayana. Yeah, thanks, Chiquita, for that. So we wanted to tell a story about the Yemez gathering in New Mexico. And it goes back to actually 1991. There was a People of Color Environmental Justice Summit. And those folks came up with some principles. And we're gonna drop a link once I can find it. I don't actually have it in the, so tech folks wait, I'll put it there eventually, but we'll eventually drop it in the chat where you can see some of the history that led up to the Jiménez gathering. But the Jiménez gathering that happened in New Mexico, it was part of a broad coalition of mostly people of color led environmental justice organizations. And they, along with Highlander, who was there as part of the Tennessee Industrial Renewal Network, working on factory closings and what to do about factory closings, and organizing against NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And they met up with, they brought a lot of groups from around the country to meet up. It was a combination of environmental groups and economic justice groups. And they brought a lot of groups from DC that had been doing coalitional work, right, in trying to do policy change around NAFTA. But a lot of these groups from DC didn't really understand grassroots organizing and didn't understand, a lot of them were white dominated and led and didn't understand how to work with people of color organizations. So the people of color at this gathering in Jiménez met the day before the full gathering, and they came up with these principles, and we'll go ahead and share those. You can put those on the screen. Thanks, Catherine. And these have been shared and circulated, and it's really exciting to see them. They're on the Climate Justice Alliance website. You might have come across them. It's pretty cool. I spoke with Susan, who was at the Jiménez gathering, and she's just like tickled and delighted that that people are still getting value out of these, even though the gathering itself, there wasn't necessarily like a big result out of that gathering. The DC groups didn't change their tune. They kept working in a top-down way for the most part. But these principles came out of that, and people still learn from them. So I just wanted to kind of invite you to see yourself as part of this legacy. You somehow got connected with Highlander. You somehow got to this workshop. And so just kind of noticing that we're part of this river of struggle of people who've come before, and we're taking up the mantle and we're continuing the work. So the first principle is to be inclusive in decision-making, in strategy building, in resource distribution, and in ownership over the work. So to be inclusive. The second is emphasis on bottom-up organizing. And by that, we mean base building and leadership development. So like we're bringing people into the organizations, we're building their leadership, people who are impacted directly. The third is let people speak for themselves and be responsible to those most directly affected. So who are impacted by the issues and the problems. For the environmental justice folks, it was, the people of color getting to say, mostly the folks who are being impacted by pollution and toxins are communities of color. And so we need accountability to those communities, not just to these white dominated nonprofits that are doing environmental work. The principle 4, work together in solidarity and mutuality and incorporate the goals and values of the collective into your own work. So this was about encouraging some of the economic groups to embrace and uplift the importance of the environmental justice movement and what they were saying about pollution. And it was also to encourage some of the environmental justice groups to include and to incorporate the economic justice principles from the economic groups, right? So like, how do we build bridges across our movements? Number 5 is build just relationships among ourselves. So if we're not practicing justice between ourselves, how are we building a new world? And then 6, commitment to self-transformation and embodying our values. That there's a lot to unlearn and there's a lot to learn and grow. And by embodying our values, we can continue to learn and unlearn in the direction of collective liberation and being in beloved community. So those are the Jiménez principles, and that's the little story about them. I'm so excited to share them with you and inviting you to see yourself as part of this legacy. I'm going to kick it to Ayana to share a little bit from a Southern specific organization and perspective.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'm just going to share a little bit about some principles that we have heard and used in the Southern Movement Assembly, but as well as in different organizing spaces across the South. And these principles were adopted by the lovely and beloved Brenda Hyde with Southern Echo, based in Mississippi. And so we'll go ahead and just pull up that slide. So yes, these are principles of community organizing. So that's all that this workshop is about. So in addition to the ones that David has brought up, we just want to uplift these principles as well. We want to make sure that we're never assuming, right? We want to meet people where they're at and never assume that someone knows something that they don't, right? Let's trust our folks. We want to work to overcome fear in ourselves and in our communities. That's exactly what y'all were talking about earlier on the values that keep you grounded. It's making sure that you're showing up, you're willing to learn and willing to push yourself too, in a healthy way, right? We also want to engage in truth telling. Let's show up as our honest and best selves, right? Tell stories about the truth. And that way we're able to ground back to that. We also want to make sure that we're involving youth. Sean brought that up earlier. How are we centering youth-led voices? How are they informing us on how we need to move better? These are going to be the future generations to pick this up, right? How do we work for mutual benefits? Taking care of each other. That's what Michael brought up. How are we able to take care of each other? These last 2 years alone have really shown that we need to listen to each other more, check in on our folks, and also share just mutual benefits with one another. And then the last one I'll leave you with is engage in clear and precise communication. Be accessible. Jane brought that up. Technology has been a roadblock for us, right? So how are we making sure that we are engaging in a clear and precise way, whether that's online or offline? And so I'll stop right there and pass it back to you, David, but that's just a few principles of community organizing from Southern Echo. And we'll also drop information in the chat too later. Thanks, David.
Yay, thank you so much, Ayana. And I love the way you tied back what people said earlier and showed how these principles are already resonating with us. So that was awesome. So we're getting ready to take a break, but before we do, I want to go ahead and introduce the next activity. Because it involves renaming yourself so that you can tell us which small group you want to be in. So if you could actually go to the slide right before that one, I think, or maybe 2 before, sorry. Yes, okay. So there are 3 aspects of community organizing that we're going to dig into when we get into small groups after the break. And these kind of map on to the popular education spiral. So if you'll go quickly to the pop ed spiral, just to remind you. Yeah, and then, so, step 1, start with the experienced participants, etc. So we'll go back again, 1 slide. So we're going to dig into these 3 areas. And the first is community building. So this is like the call, right? Part of this pop ed spiral, like bringing people in. It's starting with the experience of participants. The second area that we'll dig into is investigate and educate. So looking for patterns, adding information. And then the third is collective action. So this is like where we're practicing and preparing for action and taking action and then reflecting. And there's a lot of other aspects of community organizing. And so there's everything else, right? But we're for the purpose of the next small group, we'll dig into these 3. So what we want you to do is rename yourself. So if you can go 2 slides ahead, how many? Rename yourself with a 1, a 2, or a 3, depending on whether you want to be in community building, investigate, educate, or collective action. But we also want to know if you're speaking English today in your small group, or if you're speaking Spanish. So if you could put a 1E if you want to be in the community building group that speaks English, and a 1S if you want to be in community building speaking Spanish. And put this code in front of your name when you rename yourself. So you want to find yourself in the participant list. You can click participants. You should be at the very top. You can go to more and then rename. And then right before your name, type which group you want to be in. If you want to be in a quiet room, you'll type 4. And while we're on break, the tech folks are going to put us into breakout groups. So it's really important that you rename yourself now before we go into breakout group, or before we go on a break. Are there any questions about what we're going to do when we come back and how to rename yourself? If you have questions about how to rename yourself, the tech folks might be able to help you. But Carolyn, I see you have a question. You think everybody will benefit from it?
Yeah, when we're choosing if we're doing community building, investigate, or collective action, are you looking for where you feel you have the most experience or where you have
That's a great question.
The most to learn?
Yeah, I think either is totally fine. We have a mix of experiences in the room today. And what you're going to be doing when you get into your group is you're going to be reading through some slides, some tools related to that area or aspect of community organizing. And then you'll be talking about, like, are you familiar with these? Have you used them before? Are there things that you notice that are missing from this toolbox? And then you'll be co-creating as a group a recipe for this particular aspect. So if you're in the investigate, educate group, you're going to come up with a group recipe for investigate and educate community organizing, if that makes sense. So I think either, if you're really experienced with community building, you'll bring a lot to that group. But if you're brand new to it, you can come with your curiosity and read some of the tools and get to hear from other people's experiences too.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Come on back. Just a reminder, if you are needing interpretation, go ahead and turn it back on. Rejoin the interpretation channel. Thank you all so much. All righty. I am so excited for this portion. Of course, I'm excited about the whole workshop, but this is really what excites me to hear about the things that you're talking about. So yeah, we want to know what recipes y'all are building, right? We want to know about the ingredients that y'all are cooking with. We want to hear about some measurements. Want y'all to share back all the highlights that you jot down in your notes and from your breakout discussions. So I want to encourage those that are not comfortable to come off mute to feel free to populate those recipes in the chat, but I also want to hear from a couple of folks. So I just invite you to share back 2 or 3 things from your recipe. That can either be the recipe itself or the ingredients, however you want to spin it. So just want to come off mute and invite a few folks to share with us. I know it's, oh, there you go.
Hey, my name's Elena. Our group talked about how we weren't really sure which group we wanted to be placed in. And after reading through the slides, we were really grateful to have this resource to learn from, and we kind of felt in the right place, and learning from one another in that space about these different resources was just really helpful. So I don't really have much else to say other than thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's fine, right? This is an entry point too for some. And so to be able to share that and to learn from those resources together is a recipe in itself, right? So thank you. Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, hi. So I'm representing room 10, and we were collective action. And I just go really quick through the recipe. It's really just comprised of some of the things that we got to talk about. And of course, time goes so short. But we start by preheating our oven with education. And our ingredients, we were more interested in quality than we are quantity. So the things that I wrote down were just things that I took from the people that I was listening to and sharing with. You have to have a reason to show up. You have to have time. You have to have energy. You have to have curiosity. Curiosity is so important because otherwise you're stuck. Interest in the investment, and then you also have to have your tools. So we're going to preheat with education. So getting informed about all of those things, right? And when you take all of those things that I just listed in an individual, but also within, say, a board or a community of activists or volunteers, you put them all into that bowl and mix everything up. Because maybe not everybody's going to have every one of those ingredients, right? But you're going to mix all those people together to build, to get to end up having those traits show up in your organization and to resonate out into your community. And we also wanted to top with some digital connections. So making sure to use your digital opportunities to connect, particularly with people that are not where you are located. So if you can meet in person, but of course, something like this, we have in our group, we were from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Florida, New York City, and Tennessee, right? So we couldn't have done what we just did if we didn't have technology. So digital connections. So we're going to add some digital connections. And then we want to add a splash of coverage for events. So one of the things that one of the activists in my group was talking about was how they would plan an event, whether it was a protest, if they showed up for a non-civil disobedience, that they wanted to make sure that the media was aware of what they were doing. So it's a way to have as Lisa Jackson, I want to give her credit to this. She said, we want to make sure, I think that she was the one who said, yes, that we are we're telling our own stories, that stories are not being reframed by someone else and being told. So one of the ways to do that is to get coverage of the events that you're having. And then we just ran out of time.
Jane, it sounds like y'all had an awesome conversation. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I want to lift up what Scott shared in the chat about shared values, shared vision, and an interest in building community, and like those things attract people and keep people together. And I thought that was really great, Scott. Thank you. Since Jane since the collective action group brought up education, let's hear from one of the Investigate Educate groups.
Yeah, I'd be glad to start it off, and then maybe Biz and Rashawn can follow up from it. We spent about half our time actually looking at the slides, which were very, very informative. And so thank whoever put those slides together, as Elaine was talking about in her group as well. They're just very informative slides. But what struck me was that every kind of strategy that we talked about for educating and particularly for doing research, particularly the participatory action research, really builds on the fundamental principles of community organizing that, David, you shared with us from that New Mexico group. And the principle there is that it's really always has to come from the bottom up. From a standpoint of research, it's not only just that gives you better research, better information, and better knowledge, but it means that knowledge is going to be created by and understood by and controlled by the people that are oftentimes most of concern in whatever venue that we actually are working in. I'll stop at that point and see if Biz or Rashawn want to add to that, or anybody else in the group.
Thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, grassroots popular education, it's the education is not separate from the action, right? And the people in the room are the people impacted. So they're the ones creating the knowledge, and that's part of the taking action to change the world, and they're learning along the way. So thanks so much, Ben, for highlighting that. And I know you called on a couple of other folks in your group if they want to chime in before we hear from Chiquita.
Thank you, Ben. I'm happy to cede it to Chiquita.
Hello again, everybody. So I just want to bring up two really key points that came up in our group, which was in an Investigate and Educate group that had these 2 points haven't been mentioned yet, or at least I didn't hear them mentioned yet. One was both Kimberly and Kurt talking about the real value and impact of storytelling, of bringing people together, whether that is by restorative circle or some other methods to build trust, to get to know each other, to talk about their lived experience. We always have to remember lived experience is data, right? And in certain forms of education, particularly Black feminist education, Afrocentric education, lived experience is the top form of data, right? Like that is centered above all else.
And so it's really important for us to take that time to engage in storytelling and circles. And that is such a powerful way of being with each other as we're trying to organize community. And the second piece is we didn't see on this chart, even though like these were really wonderful explanations and suggestions, we didn't see political education on this chart as part of the work that needs to be done, particularly around skill building, supporting, like if you're going to do a participatory action research project, like you gotta like learn how to do a PAR. you can't roll out of bed and do it, right? And so like building people's capacity for community organizing, helping them develop leadership skills, and also looking at a lot of folks possess a great deal of competence, but not a lot of confidence, right? Particularly when we're dealing with marginalized folks who have been oppressed and suppressed. And so how do we support folks to be confident about what they already know and what they can learn to do in order to make their communities better? Thank you.
Ooh, y'all are on fire. I love it. I'm loving what y'all are cooking up. So many valid points. Thank you. Thank you. And I see Yaya, your hands up.
Sí, hola. Voy a hablar en español para interrumpir un poco.
I'm going to talk in Spanish. My name is Yaya. My pronouns are she, her. And I wanted to share in my group that the slides weren't up for us. We only had the general presentation in Spanish. So it was very confusing that we didn't really have information for that. And that's it. The conversation was very general, but I did wanted to share 2 points. One that Nicholas shared, and it was point number 2, but we talked about point number 1 as well. Nicholas said that how to create a space, a container where people feel safe. I always feel like that's important based on other experiences, how to do mutual aid together once you create that community, and once you have that community, that they should create that container themselves, letting us know what they need to feel safe and feel empowered in the space. And then that way we create a horizontal situation and on a vertical situation. And then also offering people power positions, not only to be there to receive information, but for them to be creating the movement together. And then I shared a point. I understand that this is from point 2, but I would say it's related more to what type of model, organizational model would be best for the type of community or action that is going to be created, because there's so many models, co-ops, collectives, grassroots, there's networking. And the other point in point 2 is which model serves the community better or best. And I think that's all. That's all I'll say. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. David, I'm going to pass it over to you to get some report backs about next steps.
Yeah, so we would love to spend more time unpacking your conversations and some of the recipes that you shared if we had more time. But just for time's sake, we're gonna kind of pivot and think about next steps, right? And there's 2 questions we're gonna drop into the chat. We're not asking you to answer these questions, but think about these in relation to what your next steps are. So are there things that you heard on this workshop, ideas, the principles, some of the tools that you read in your small group, something that one of your small group comrades said that just really resonated with you that may help you navigate those roadblocks differently? Or how are you leaning to embodying these principles, right? So that you and your group and your community can continue moving towards collective liberation and expanding what's possible. So with those things in mind, what is the next step that you're going to take after this workshop? What is one next step? Individually or part of your organization and in your community? What's a next step you're going to take? And please share those in the chat. Love to hear those before we pivot to like doing another embodiment exercise. All right, so Melinda says, share topics with my organization. So that's really good to hear. Thanks, Melinda. Chiquita, definitely focusing a lot more on storytelling as per Kim Adams. I'm so glad you heard that and are inspired to move in that direction. That's great. Beckett says, connecting with y'all, email me. Emmy Kim says, I will share what I learned with groups I'm working with. That's great. It's good to hear. Michael Tierney, gathering neighbors and colleagues to talk about how organizing looks different post the pandemic. Post, yes, in quotes. I appreciate that. Lisa, planning a community meal. Chelsea says, sharing our own lives and experiences. Tony offering community building that considers the other steps, info gathering and action from the beginning, from jump. Yeah, appreciate that. Pilar, learning new methods that often come up in my organizing work, but are really foreign to me. I want to know more so I can be a stronger support to my fellow organizers. So glad that you're learning stuff here, Pilar. Ethan Lawrence saying, next step is panel discussion for the town and committee I chair, centering the stories and lived experiences of those most affected, and then using that as a foundation for policy work. That's great to hear. Yeah, panels from folks who are impacted that's a great tool in the toolbox. I'm seeing so many good things in the chat. And as usual, we've planned too much for the amount of time we have. And I'm going to pivot to Ayana, who's going to take us through part 2 of our embodiment exercise, just so we're making sure we're continuing to stay in our bodies as we do this important work.
Thank you so much, David. I want us to go ahead and get grounded again, like how we start. So go ahead and gently turn off your camera. So you're on mute. Go ahead and adjust your body, whether you're sitting or standing, to make sure that your feet are steady on the ground. Let's go ahead and take a deep breath in. So go ahead and draw back to your visualization. We're in the kitchen with our loved one. Some things are boiling and we're ready to check on the dishes that we have been preparing this whole time together. Let's go ahead and take another deep breath to take in all the aromas. Let's go ahead and consider, have we put in all the ingredients? Do a last bit of taste test. Make sure it's not too much salt or too much sugar, whatever you're cooking. And now let's think about, how are we going to serve this dish, right? We just spent all day cooking it up. How are we going to serve this dish? Are you going to offer everybody their own plate? Will there be a large serving tray in the center of your table for folks to grab in? Or maybe you're going for buffet style, right? Allowing folks to take what they need. Let's take another deep breath in. Let's try to listen for the laughter, the sounds of enjoyment. Try to envision the smiles on everyone's faces as they come around your table to get ready for this dish. Also remember that what was once 2 people in this kitchen has now expanded to so much more. Take another deep breath in. Envision all the love and hard work that you put into this dish. Also think about what it means to be able to share this meal at this time with these people. And lastly, as we take our last deep breath in, I want you to hold on to the fact that this meal, this dish that you've created, the one that you were invited to help prepare, this dish in particular, is going to nourish our people and allow us to move forward together. So I invite you to gently come back into our space. Whenever you're ready, opening your eyes and coming back on camera. Maybe take one more deep breath as you're in to our space again. And so thank y'all so much for enjoying that embodiment practice with us. We want to quickly take a moment and do an evaluation, as this is a new workshop for us. And so one of the great lessons I've learned from Maya Angelou is that we do the best we can until we know better, right? And so once we know better, we do better. And so we are inviting you to help us do better. As trainers and facilitators in creating future workshop series, we want to know how we did today. So I want to take a few minutes for folks to go ahead and populate in the chat any pluses that you have, things that resonated with you and stood out, or name also any deltas, areas of missed opportunities, things that we could change and get better at. So I'll repeat that again. We want to just take a moment to go ahead and populate in the chat any pluses, things that resonated with you, stood out, and that you're going to take and carry with you. And then also any missed opportunities or areas that we need to change and get better at. Thank you. And also, if you're feeling moved, what we're going to do is drop in the chat a link to a more in-depth evaluation, which we will be able to record and always revisit and go back to as we're creating these series. So I encourage y'all to also complete that more in-depth evaluation for us so that we can grow better together. Alrighty. Thank you so much. Before we close this today, I just want to pass it over to David just to highlight any new opportunities, next steps for us.
Thanks, Ayana, and thank you all for sharing this feedback. It really does help, and it's really important. We know feedback is a gift, and we really appreciate it. We really appreciate you taking the time before you turn off your computer to go to that website and fill out the longer evaluation. It really helps us. And like Ayana said, this is a new workshop or a new thing we're trying. So we're really excited to see how it went for you and what was useful about it. So coming up, we've got some more in this Threads Highlander 90th year series. On March 14th, we're having our first methodology skill up on popular education. And stay tuned for more of those methodology skill ups throughout the year. On March 31st, we have the next in the Southern Beyond Survival series called From Racial Capitalism to Solidarity Economy. So excited for that. Please register for that. Both of the registrations for those are on that Threads website that was dropped in the chat. We're going to be, so the Southern Movement Assembly is continuing to hold study groups. The next Hot Damn study group is on mutual aid, and that'll start in March and go March to April. And then we are also going to have a workshop on community governance and thriving groups to kind of round out the Southern Beyond Survival series. We'll also be announcing a really exciting fellowship opportunity for folks who want some deeper accompaniment with Highlander and work with us for the rest of 2022. So we're excited to announce that soon. And since you registered for this workshop, you will definitely get the information in your email inbox about that. Really just want to take a minute to thank each of you for taking the time. If you're still here, for staying an extra four or 5 minutes beyond when we committed to be done. I really want to thank Ayana. So blessed to get to work with you and honored to get to work with you. I just always appreciate you so much, and all the work that you put and love that you put into this agenda and facilitating. I just, yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you to our interpreters and our tech support folks from People's Hub and our interpreters from the Sinzotle Cooperative. We could not do these workshops without you, and we could not make them as accessible and fun as they are without the amazing tech support and the interpreters. So really appreciate y'all as well. And with that, I want to invite y'all to come off mute, come on camera, give some love to each other, wish each other a good rest of your weekend, and just really encourage you to take these tools back. Wish you the best in your organizing work, and stay in touch. Let us know how it goes. Don't be a stranger, and we'll definitely see you on the Hill soon, hopefully.
So very useful.
Thank you so much, Highlander.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone so much. This was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. It was great to be here.
So amazing to see.
Very much. Thanks a lot.
It's so amazing to see these principles applied in this context that could only be done in person before. Thank you. So powerful.
There's just so much experience and different perspectives here. I really was honored to meet all of you. And I feel like I would take another Slack into my life if it were filled with people like you. And like a nice digital space where we could asynchronously talk to each other. I would enjoy that.